Are you running on fumes, feeling like you haven't slept a few nights in years? Well, you're not alone. My name is Dr. Tramaine Presley, and I am the Director of Child, Adolescent, and Family Services at the Family Institute at Northwestern University.
And I'm Dr. Leigh Monahan, and I'm a staff therapist at the Family Institute, and I do therapy with children and families as well as evaluations. So, Tremaine, how's your sleep been this week?
My sleep has been a little inconsistent. And so consistently going to bed on time, but a lot of disruptions in the middle of the night. So frequently waking up in the middle of the night, so not able to sleep the full night all the way through, but waking up on time and going to bed on time pretty consistently.
Yeah,
What
pretty
about
good.
you?
I wish I could say the same. I've been going to bed a little bit later than normal, and my puppy has been having some stomach issues this week. So we've had a couple of those late night wakings and having to go out in the middle of the night, which I'm sure a lot of the parents on this podcast can relate to those late night wakings and how disruptive it can be.
Oh. And so we know that when our sleep is disrupted, it's never good for us the next day, right? So it sounds
Hmm.
like we both had disrupted sleep this week.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about the importance of family sleep hygiene and how it can help to transform our lives. We'll be diving into practical strategies to help you and your family get the rest you deserve. So talk to us, Leigh, about like why are we even doing this? Why is this even important?
So one of the reasons I was interested in talking about this is because I talk about this all the time with my clients. This is something that comes up in my clinical work so frequently when I'm talking with kids across the age span, and their parents because sleep is a precious commodity, and I feel like a lot of folks that I work with are not getting enough of it. So it impacts us on a lot of different levels that we'll talk about over the next hour or so.
And not to mention the Surgeon General's report on parent stress, right? So
Mm,
in general put out this report really noting that parents are really experiencing enormous amounts of stress. And we know that when our stress levels are really high, that can be impactful to sleep. So today we thought it would be noteworthy to create an opportunity to share some information talking about the behavioral aspects of sleep so that we could help to mitigate some of that stress that parents are feeling. And so this episode, this workshop, this information that we're sharing today does not pertain to individuals with sleep disorders. We are trained psychologists and we're not medical professionals. So we are here to talk about the psychological and the behavioral aspects of sleep.
mhm.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say the good news about that is for a lot of people, when their sleep is impacted, the behavioral and sleep environment interventions can have a really big impact. So I think there's a lot of hope in that.
For sure. So today, let's start with, I think, just kind of laying the groundwork, talking about some foundational knowledge about sleep hygiene and the standard sleep cycle in general, right? And so we know that good sleep hygiene is crucial for families because it impacts the physical and the mental well-being of every member, physically, emotionally, mentally. It helps to promote stronger relationships, improve performance, etc. Right? So we know that it has some added benefits. And so each one of us, all of us, we all, when we're sleeping, we go through what we call the sleep cycle. And so the sleep cycle has 4 different stages. And so a standard sleep cycle consists of these 4 stages, in which each stage playing a different role in restorative sleep. And so the key word there is restorative sleep. And so
Hmm.
I think that we don't talk enough about sleep restoration and how we can achieve that. So my hope is that today we are able to talk about different strategies and really provide some information in the hopes that individuals can start to get some of that restorative sleep, right? Yeah.
Well, that sounds great.
And so each stage or each cycle rather lasts about 90 minutes per cycle. And so we'll start with the breakdown of the stages just so that folks can have, again, that foundational knowledge about what is actually happening at each stage. So if you feel like you're getting sleepy as I'm talking to these through these stages, just stand up and do a couple of jumping jacks, right? So stage 1, this is that transition from wakefulness to sleep. It is a very light sleep where you may drift in and out of consciousness, but you're still able to be aware of like your surroundings. So for example, when I go to sleep sometimes or I'm preparing to go to bed, I like to watch an episode of The Golden Girls, or sometimes an episode of The Office. I'm a huge The Office fan, and so as I'm in the bed and my body is relaxing, I always call that my wind down time. I can still hear what Blanche is saying on The Golden Girls,
Mm.
right? I can still hear what Michael is saying to Dwight,
Whether you want to or not.
whether I want to or not. But guess what? My eyes are closed. And so I may miss a couple of things that are being said on the TV episodes that I'm watching, but I can still hear the TV playing in the background. And so with this, I know when I'm entering into stage 1, my muscle activity starts to slow down. Have you ever had the thought of like, I want to get up to turn the TV off, but your body just doesn't move to turn the TV off?
Too tired.
Too tired, but I'm already in stage 1. My muscle activity is slowing down, and my body is actually preparing itself to drift into stage 2. Now, stage 2 is going to be your deeper sleep than stage 1. My body temperature drops. I might cuddle a little bit more into my blanket, and my heart rate starts to slow down. And so now my body is preparing to enter into a deeper state of sleep. The brain waves in my brain, they become slower with occasional bursts of rapid activity, but ultimately this stage 2 is preparing us to go into a deeper stage, which is stage 3. Now, stage 3 is our deepest state of sleep. It is often referred as like a slow wave or a delta sleep. It is most restorative stage where our body starts to repair its tissues, it builds muscle, it builds bone, it strengthens the immune system, all the things that we need to prepare us to handle the next day's task. And so we want to be in stage 3 a lot of the time. But what happens is stage 3 is longer in the first half of the night. So we're really getting that restorative sleep during that first half of the night. So that sounds like it's probably the most important.
Mm.
Stage 4, well, also known as REM sleep, is characterized by like some rapid eye movement. And sometimes I see this with my dog. My dog is sleeping and they might enter into a deep state of sleep where they really can't be woken up very easily. But I notice that they're breathing a little faster and their eyes are doing some sort of like twitching thing. And I'm like, well, what at first, when I first got this dog, I thought, what is wrong? Is something wrong with my dog? I was concerned. But then I realized, oh, they have just reached the REM stage of sleep. So this stage 4 that we're talking about. Brain activity happens in really this is typically when we dream the most, right? So because this is our last stage and we kind of cycle in and out of stage 1 all the way through 4, sometimes people say like, I had a dream, but I can't remember, right? Sometimes you don't remember your dreams, and that's totally okay. Stage 4, though, is really important because it plays a role in learning and memory. And we need our memory and we need to be able to learn information for the purposes of completing tasks. So the REM sleep becomes longer as the night progresses, which again is key to learning and memory processes in our brain. So what happens that this cycle repeats. So you repeat this cycle through these stages multiple times throughout the night. The first cycle usually has shorter REM periods, but like longer deep sleep. So that restorative sleep, which is key. But as the night progresses, you spend more time in REM and less time in that deep sleep because your body is restoring and has been restored. So we really want
So
to make sure. Go ahead, Lee.
I was just going to say, so what happens then if, you have one of those nights where you don't go to bed on time and you're getting less of that REM sleep? What does that mean for learning and memory?
Yeah. And so I imagine that our memory might not be as sharp the next day, might have some struggles. I know sometimes I might utilize more strategies when I'm not getting a full night's rest where I've spent more time in REM. I just noticed that I might have to do a little bit more to-do list
Yeah.
to kind of remember all of the tasks that need to be completed for the day. I think that the importance of this sleep cycle, though, is that really understanding that there are some physical and mental processes that happen at each of the stage that play in our ability to restore, right? To restore ourselves to take on the next day's challenges, right? Disruptions to this sleep cycle can lead to sleep deprivation. So that's when we can enter into a state of being deprived of sleep when our sleep cycle is disrupted. And that can lead to various health issues and problems. So I think understanding that sleep cycle can improve our sleep hygiene and hopefully help us get a little bit more rest at night.
Yeah.
I think the biggest question that I come across, though, and you tell me if you've ever experienced this in your clinical work, is is quality better or quantity better, right? Should I be achieving and aiming for more quantity, so the number of hours of sleep that I achieve at night, or should I be aiming for quality? Have you ever
Yep.
heard that?
I get that all the time, and I feel like especially for the kids and teens that I work with, both are off. We're working on both.
They're working on both. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when working with children, it's really about like helping them understand the importance of sleep.
hmm
So that they value, like learn to value sleep.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when I'm working with parents, it's like the how to, right? Like the strategies on how to improve sleep. But with children, it's just like I have to get it. Like we just got to
Get
let it.
on board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get on board early.
Yeah.
Um, so when it comes to quality versus quantity, I will say that many experts emphasize that quality it takes precedence, right? It's really important that we start aiming for quality of sleep. And so when we're talking about quantity, we're talking about the number of hours of sleep, right? Generally, adults need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. And so insufficient quantity, right, can lead to fatigue, impaired cognitive function, increased risk health, and all of those things. But the quality really matters. So quality refers to how well you sleep. Good quality sleeps mean falling to sleep relatively quickly. So not, I know that I've experienced, even in my own clinical practice, just working with people who really struggle to, fall asleep. So they're tossing and turning all night and really have a hard time and taking them a while to fall asleep. And so in that, when that comes up, I think my approach is to help them to discover strategies to get their body to relax so that it can prepare themselves to fall asleep. Um, Also, too, quality means that we're going to be sleeping through the night with minimal disruptions, right? And so when I say that, sometimes I get the question like, well, can I use the restroom? Absolutely, you can use the
Yeah.
restroom. You should. Again, you're not medical professionals, but you definitely should use the restroom.
Yeah.
But minimum disruptions are, okay, yes, I've gotten up, I've used the restroom, or I have a toddler that I'm sleep training and I put them back to bed once or twice, right? But if you're waking up every 2 hours, and I think sometimes we find this with like new parents, right? People who are transitioning into parenthood, they often, report feeling kind of that sleep deprivation because they're not getting that quality of sleep versus someone who says I got 5 hours or 4 hours of good quality sleep. They are likely less to report feeling exhausted and sleep deprived. So spending sufficient time in the deeper and restorative stages of sleep obviously yield to better quality. And so I think quality often just matters more because, again, of the restoration that it provides. But I also know that it has some health implications and it just produces like high time quality, better focus, concentration, and just overall performance for our next day. So, in summary, if I had to say any, like a key point to take away is to achieve quality over quantity. So, Leigh, can you talk to us about like the sleep drive? So, what actually is happening when we are asleep?
Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about some words get thrown around a lot and hopefully add some clarity to them. So there's two main things that we're gonna talk about. The first thing is circadian rhythm. So I feel like I've, always heard about circadian rhythm, and only in my professional work did I actually learn what it was and how it impacts us. So we're gonna talk about the circadian rhythm, and then we're gonna talk about the sleep drive and what kind of drives us. To falling asleep or feeling sleepy. So the circadian rhythm is about 24 hours. Research shows that's like I think 24 hours and 15 minutes or something like that. Um, and this is our natural internal clock that's helping to keep us in that awake asleep cycle. Um, and it's regulated by a part of our brain. And the biggest thing that impacts it is light and darkness. So when I say that, hopefully what popped into your head is the sun. Um, so it's the sun works on that part of the brain to let us know when we should be awake, when we should be asleep. And that changes throughout the day. So it works on things like our level of wakefulness or alertness, how sleepy we're feeling. It also has an impact on a lot of physiological parts of our daily routine, like body temperature. It's lower in the morning, and it rises gradually throughout the day. It also has a big impact on how our hormones are released and when they're released. So I already talked about light and darkness being the biggest factor, um, but there's lots of other things that can impact how our circadian rhythm is functioning. Um, so if I gave you a second to think about it, my guess is most people could come up with a couple of guesses. Um, and so if you thought of caffeine, and I'll talk about caffeine in a little bit because caffeine is my best friend and worst enemy. You know what I mean, Tramaine? Um, so caffeine can have a big impact. Alcohol can have an impact. Like Tremaine was saying earlier, stress, how our mental health is doing, um, physical activity, jet lag, if you're a shift worker, um, and then insufficient sleep can kind of mess with our internal systems. And we'll talk about this later, but screen time also can really impact our sleep drives and mess with our rhythm. So the next word I hear in my practice a lot. And I'm sure that people listening to this presentation also have heard the word melatonin. So melatonin is produced in our brain, so it's a naturally occurring hormone. And the circadian rhythm really impacts when that's being released. So when our circadian rhythm gets to that point of the day, it tells your body, light's going down, the sun's going down, that it's time to release this melatonin, that it's nighttime, it's time for sleep. And that's like one of the biggest biological signals that we should be going to bed. And so the tricky thing about melatonin is a lot of times people use it as like a sleep aid or think that it like puts you out to sleep. I have been reading this book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend if you're a sleep nerd like me and interested in learning more. But in that book, Dr. Walker gives an analogy that I thought was pretty helpful. That melatonin, if you're at a race, melatonin is the official that tells you it's time to sleep, and then the runners actually run the race. So melatonin is going to tell your body to start that process, but there's other parts of the brain that are actually making your brain and your body go to sleep. So it can be very helpful, but it doesn't function like a lot of people think it does. Like it doesn't knock you out like that. It just gets your body primed and ready to go to bed.
So
Um,
it's like a
and
signal, would you say? Like a signal?
Yeah. So
Mm.
it's a signal rather than actually putting your body to sleep. So I always tell folks to check in with their doctor, with their pediatrician, and to see if it's appropriate for them. I never, recommend that or prescribe it because, like you said, we're not medical doctors. But from a behavioral standpoint, if that's what you're relying on, we probably have some other areas that we can help if you are having trouble with sleep rather than just relying on the melatonin. Do you experience that as well, Tremaine?
Yeah, I think that a lot of parents, or not even parents, but just clients in general, because I see people across the age um, spectrum. But, I think a lot of individuals think that melatonin helps to put us asleep rather
Hmm.
than it's serving as a signal. So I really like the analogy of that you gave, right? About melatonin and it really just kind of signaling us it's time to go to sleep. And so I just wonder if melatonin is natural, right? So it's like we
Hmm.
already have it, it sounds like, right? And so if we take more of it, it's just that some people may need more, you think, than others, or I wonder, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think that might be part of it. I also think that, um, one of the placebos have a very strong effect. And so I think there's absolutely a biological component to it, but if people are using that as part of their sleep routine, that's part of their sleep association. I take this melatonin and my body's getting ready to wind down. So placebo, biological, I think there's a lot of different things going on with that. So when we're getting sleepy towards that time of the day, melatonin is at its peak. And so it's pushing us towards that sleep. And one of the really important things that happens, in addition to everything you already described, Tremaine, is through the night, our brain processes it and the concentration of melatonin goes down. So when the sun comes out, which um, different times of the year comes earlier, later, stronger. But when the sun comes out, it tells that part of the brain that's producing it to like slow down on the melatonin, and to stop releasing it. So that allows the wakefulness to come back. So that's why getting enough sleep is important for your body to be able to cycle through that, to reduce the melatonin, throughout the night.
How cool. I mean, we could be just nerds, but
I,
I think it's so cool to really understand what is going on in our bodies during this activity, right? So it's like we all have to go to sleep at night, right? Like everyone has to
Mhm.
get sleep. This is a human need. We all need rest, right? But there are important things that are happening when we
Yep.
are going to bed, and there's a lot of activity and like you said, communication that is happening while we're resting and going and while we're asleep. So I think that is so cool to know that the sun is communicating like melatonin, slow up, no more,
Yep.
time to get up.
Yep.
So I love
Time
that.
to get up. Time to get up, be alert, ready for the day. And the other kind of sleep drive that we talk about is, what's sometimes referred to as sleep pressure. And this is regulated by a hormone that people are probably less familiar with, adenosine. So adenosine, and this is where caffeine's going to come in because I learned about this recently and it just made so much sense in my life. So I'm going to share it with you all. Um, so during the day, adenosine is building up in your brain. So the longer you're awake, the more adenosine, um, is coming into your brain. And the more adenosine that we have in our brain, the sleepier we are. It increases that desire, that pressure for sleep. Um, it makes us feel sleepier and it turns down the parts of our brain that makes us feel more alert. So it's kind of happening both at the same time. And again, at the peak, that's when we have our strongest urge to sleep. Now, here's where caffeine comes in. So caffeine, works on the same parts of the brain that take in the adenosine. So rather than, your brain kind of naturally taking in that adenosine and like increasing your fatigue during the day, it blocks it.
Mhm.
So the adenosine can't go into the. And so, what do you think, Tremaine, happens when the adenosine's not getting in and the caffeine's blocking it? How do you think you feel?
It sounds like there might be a little bit of a crash going on.
Yeah. So initially, it feels great, right? You feel more alert. You feel more, for a lot of people, when you drink caffeine, you can concentrate more. And yeah, that's why a lot of us drink caffeine in the morning, because it's blocking that sleepiness from getting into
Wow.
those to the part of the brain. Um, and caffeine hangs out in our system for a long time. So it's going to be pretty potent for at least 5 to 7 hours, and then it's going to start dropping off. That's the half-life of it. Um, and different people can work it through their system at different rates. And that has a lot to do with the liver. So here's where the crash comes in,
Okay, I
which
was gonna
blew
say,
my mind.
talk to us about the caffeine crash because
Yes.
I get a lot of clients who experience, and more so adults than children, obviously, but who experience that caffeine crash and then they just feel so horrible, but
Yep.
they end up wanting to take more caffeine. So talk to us
Yep.
about the caffeine crash.
Yeah, so the thing about adenosine is it's kind of like if you plug your fingers in your ears and la la la, I can't hear you. The noise is still happening outside, right? Or if you're waiting in line to, let's say, go to a play or a concert, even though the doors are blocked, people are lining up, right? So same thing with adenosine. Even though the part of the brain that takes it in usually is blocked by caffeine, that adenosine is still building and building and building. Doesn't get rid of it, it just holds it at bay for a bit. So as your liver and your body processes that adenosine, um, those parts of the brain open up. And as it opens up, that adenosine is going to come in and hit you um, a lot harder and a lot faster and a lot more suddenly because it's been building up. So it's still the same amount as if you had never had caffeine at all. And so that's where the crash comes in, is when it's rushing into that part of the brain that understands that sleepiness. And so what people get into that negative cycle of is, okay, I'm crashing, so I'm going to take in more caffeine. We're going to block that adenosine, and it's going to keep building, and we'll just keep going and going. And then the later you drink, for a lot of people, that's going to impact how you're able to fall asleep if the adenosine is not there in the same way.
Oh, I see. And that explains the crash. So how has
Yeah.
that changed your, or shifted, I should say, your thoughts about like caffeine intake and things like that?
So it makes me think twice about having that 1 p.m., 2 p.m. cup of coffee,
Mhm.
right? So I try to, I'm not gonna lie, I still drink my coffee. I love my coffee. But I'm gonna, I am pretty intentional if I'm gonna drink more than that 2 cups. And I'm gonna drink it earlier in the day. And I'm clued into my body when that crash is coming, and biology is a powerful force. So, and the other important thing about sleep, um, is sleep during sleep, your body um reduces that adenosine. So if you are not getting enough sleep, you are not taking enough adenosine out of your brain and your body. And so that's one of the reasons, and there's a lot, sleep is pretty complicated. But if you don't give yourself enough opportunity to take out that adenosine, you're starting from not your baseline. You're starting from having extra adenosine in your body as you're waking up. So that's where that sleep debt comes in. If you
Mhm.
don't have a chance to clear that adenosine, you're gonna likely wake up more tired because that hormone is still floating around in your brain.
So, more of the story is clear out the adenosine, guys.
Yeah, give yourself a chance to keep that going. And so, I think the important part of that is knowing that sleep is a really complex process, that there's lots of physiological, hormonal, um, you know, and different parts of the brain that are involved. And so you can't really cheat a good night of sleep. It's going to catch up with you. Um, and one of the reasons that we care about this, and, shifting more into our clinical work and why this is important, is we know that there are links between poor sleep and mental health, as well as poor sleep and stress. So when I'm working with kids and families, I always start by asking about 4 factors, and how they're doing in these 4 areas. So I always ask about sleep, nutrition, are they getting enough fuel? Movement, are they, moving their body in ways that are enjoyable for them, whether that's walking or sport or things like that. And then what's their hydration like? Because if any of those areas are really out of whack, it's not causing the mental health challenges or the behavioral challenges, but I'll tell you what, it's not helping. And so it's really hard to fight that if any of those 4 areas are off. Obviously, today we're talking about sleep, but I think it is really important to think about that bidirectional, that chicken or egg
Yeah.
relationship when it comes to sleep, because as we just talked about, sleep has such a big impact on memory, concentration. It also, when we are sleeping, our body's processing and decreasing cortisol. So there are hormones that are being impacted. And so it touches a lot of different areas. And there's lots of links between sleep deprivation and things like anxiety or depression or other mental health concerns, as to for both anxiety and depression, sleep is one of the core symptoms that get impacted. So I think that's important to keep in mind because it does catch up with you.
Yeah, unfortunately, right? Yeah. And then also I think about like mood instability, right? Increased irritability, mood swings, right? I think decreased tolerance, right? So just kind of being irritable or annoyed easily, more easily, when
Hmm.
you are deprived of sleep. I always say attention and alertness. And so, I can always tell that like I didn't get good quality sleep the night before just when driving, right? And I will refuse to drive because when you're driving, your attention is divided, right, among so many,
Hmm.
and it requires, I think, you know, alertness, right? We need to be sharp and alert to our surroundings and to how we are handling the vehicle. I think the great thing about our memory is that, we operate from this place of, automaticity, right? So things just become, we are able to perform behaviors very automatically.
Hmm.
However, if you're tired and you're deprived of sleep, things move so slow, right? So we really want to make sure that we are getting good rest, just to keep our attention, right? Sustained attention, divided attention, sharp, our alertness to different stimuli. I think when people have to do jobs such as like data entry, right? And things are, you have to be really meticulous, right, about the tasks that you're completing that require a lot of detail. You want to make sure that you are alert. So, our reaction times can be really slow, impacting performance, et cetera. So, and you can really, I think put yourself in a position to get hurt. So, we really want to make sure that we are focusing on improving sleep, because it really impacts attention and alertness, right? Not to mention memory and learning, right? So sleep playing a very crucial part in memory. And I remember like in high school, like right before a test, they always say, make sure you get these standardized tests,
Hmm.
the stuff the schools, districts really look at, they was like, make sure you get a good night's rest, right? And I didn't, you're not really teaching us, or maybe they taught us and I just that's it when I was in high school. But now that I'm older and I'm working with individuals, whether that be with adults or children, really understanding the crucial role that sleep plays in memory consolidation, right? So
Yeah.
being able to transfer information that I learned that I'm holding into short-term memory and consolidating it over to long-term memory so that I'm able to like recall that information when I see a question on a test, right? That stuff is important. Learning new
And
things.
I
Go ahead.
kids don't believe me when I tell them that.
I know.
They're like, Dr. Lee, no way.
Yes, yes, it really does help. But I think also too, like the lack of sleep really helps with like it really impacts like just being able to learn, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, I think the learning processes, right? All of the processes, the cognitive processes that go into learning a new thing, right? That's why we call it what the learning curve, right? You're learning a new thing and it's really, really hard, right? And so your brain is trying to configure, process, hold, consolidate information, to maybe prior existing information. But again, your brain is doing so many things to learn new things and then recall existing information that if you are not getting the sleep that you need, it will make that learning process much more challenging and much more difficult. So I would say, we really want to make sure that we are, again, thinking about sleep and its impact as well as its benefits. But I think the impact of poor sleep also is important to consider and think about.
For
I
sure.
know you do testing, right? And so I imagine, you've seen a lot of children or just even adults with executive functioning issues, right? That's that higher level cognitive processes. Do you have any thoughts about like how sleep also plays a role in like executive functioning, decision making, judgment, like that?
Yeah, it can, for all the reasons that you already mentioned, it can really impact all of those areas. And specifically with the testing area, that's always a question I ask, when they come in the morning, how did you sleep last night? When I'm talking with the parents before the evaluation, how does your child generally sleep? Because if they're not sleeping well, amongst other things, it can get pretty muddy about if this is, if there's an underlying disorder or neurological difference, or is this a factor that's having a big impact? So, of course, it doesn't explain everything, but again, if that area of sleep is not going well, it can really muddy the water of what's actually going on.
Yeah. And I imagine, right, our interpretations aren't as accurate because sleep could be playing a role in how
Yeah.
we perform on the test, right? So I think in essence, overall, we know that sleep has some really great benefits and it does some really cool things to our body, right? And the purpose is to help restore restore us, but then really understanding, I think, the impact of poor sleep is also important as well. Um, let's start talking about some strategies of what people can do to help, I think, focus a little bit more on improving that and achieving restorative sleep. Um, what are your thoughts about just like children? Like, yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to give a quick example, if that's okay. I have a family that I worked with that the child, for a number of different reasons, started sleeping in the parents' bed, and no one was getting good sleep. There's lots of different reasons why people co-sleep, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but it wasn't working for this family. The parents were tired, the child was tired, they were disrupting each other's sleep. And, there was less time for the parents to connect and have that time as a couple. And so there were a number of reasons why it wasn't working for the family. So we started working on it. And the child was coming, the child and the family were coming to work with me for challenging behavior, difficulties with emotion regulation, impulse control, um, a variety of different things, and symptoms related to ADHD. And so we spent about, I would have to say probably 8 months or so working on this. So the first step was getting the child comfortable in their room again, because there had been some things that they were scared about, loud noises, things like that. So, you know, working on getting her comfortable back in her room, and then working with the parent to spend less time in the room and work their way back to getting back to their bed when she woke up in the middle of the night. And correlation does not equal causation, right? So just because two things are happening at the same time does not mean they're causing each other. But as sleep has gotten better, we're seeing a real decrease in challenging behavior and an increase in distress tolerance from the parents. So being able to kind of go with the flow, because when the parents are exhausted, you have less resources to keep that patience, to work with the child on strategies. And so again, I want to highlight correlation does not equal causation, but it's that idea of a rising tide lifts all boats. Because both the child and the parents were getting better sleep, they were much better able to apply the strategies, and work through some of the difficulties that the child was having.
But that's
Um,
but that's awesome though, right? So I'm also thinking about couples, right?
Hmm.
I imagine, and we mentioned this earlier, that it does strengthen relationships um, when the parents or the adults of the home are able to achieve, I would believe, a good night's rest, right? And it reminds me, recently I had a client come in, and she and her partner are working on improving their sleep hygiene for their whole entire family. They have a small child that I believe is about 6 years old now. And she said that they both decided that it was 9:30, and they both went to bed together and
Hmm.
went to sleep. And the next day was just blissful, right? I
Hmm.
think they had such a much more easier time navigating the day. And I mean, children are going to be children, and that's just what it is. And you do have to have patience, right? You do have to have a higher distress tolerance when working with children or just parenting children. And so she said the next day was like it's very smooth and very blissful and everyone's mood. And so she was like, I hate to say it, but there might be something to the sleep thing. And I said, I'm saying, right? What'd you say? Correlation is not causation, but right. I think there is a strong relationship that exists between, good quality sleep or good sleep hygiene practices and some of the other things that you're mentioning, which then have more impact on the entire family unit.
Yeah. So what do you think? Where do you usually start, Tremaine, when you work with folks on how to work on sleep hygiene?
I'm my initial start is usually prioritizing and optimizing sleep. So after I get through all of the psychoeducation around kind of what we already talked about, right? About what's happening when we sleep and why it's important and its negative impacts, right? I start talking when I'm thinking about like actual practical strategies. It's like, let's talk about sleep priority in your life, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Usually people prioritize sleep and they're like, it's important. I'll get it when I get it and however I get
Yep.
it. But they don't really optimize and prioritize sleep as being
Yep.
key. So that's generally where I start. I think that saying with especially like parents with like infants, like, new parents or parents with, a newborn at home, right? They say sleep when the babies sleep, right? Obviously, that comes with some modifications because while this is ideal, it's not always practical, right?
Right.
To even do that. But having help, social support to help coordinate shifts can also help to optimize or to prioritize that sleep. So even those short naps, 20 to 30 minutes, can make a huge difference for those folks. But when I'm working with adults and working with parents, I really want to get a layout of, and even children, like, what is your sleep time, right?
Hmm.
And what is your awake time? And I count how many hours that is. And I see where we can make some schedule shifts if possible, right?
Yeah.
Establishing, I think, a practical and consistent sleep schedule is so important. Remember at the beginning, when we, first started, I said, sleep this week has been inconsistent, but consistently I have been going to bed on time.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter how tired I was during the day, I still made a consistent effort to still make sure that I make my bedtime. So I could be really exhausted and go to sleep earlier, but I know that would just throw things off, right?
Right.
I stuck to whatever the sleep schedule is. And yes, I do have sleep alarm or reminder on my phone, my iPhone,
Hmm.
and my Apple Watch. It tells me, Tremaine, it's time.
Yep.
to go to bed. It's time to wind down time.
I've got a
But
smart plug that turns off the light if I'm still in my living room.
perfect, right? All of the things. I actually have like some plant lights, right?
Mm,
And when they pop on, it's like, oh, I'm up too late, gotta go.
yeah.
Right. But again, I'm trying to have reminders that let me know to stay on schedule consistently as much as possible. Now, I can be a little rigid sometimes cognitively, and I
Mhm.
always want to stick to that schedule. But sometimes I can be a little flexible, and I might have a friend that might come into town, or I might have some family that might be visiting, or I might be on vacation. Am I going to bed at 8 o'clock? Probably not. Okay, probably let's just be honest here, right? And so I can exercise some flexibility, but for the most part, my sleep schedule is really consistent. So that's where I start. I start with helping families achieve and identify a practical sleep schedule where they can achieve consistency.
Yeah, I love that word practical. Because we live in the real world and that's an important thing to recognize. And I know most people have probably heard this before, but trying to keep the same schedule weekday, weekends, because it's so biologically based. Our body has this set of biological events that are happening that get kind of wacky if you're having big swings with your sleep time. So
Yeah.
I
Where,
know
where
that
do
can
you
be
start?
hard.
You're working with families. Like, where do you start?
So I start there, but where I go next usually is let's look at what the bedtime routine is looking like. So really getting into the nitty gritty, because there are so many complex body system things that happen, the more that your body can learn to associate with your bedtime routine, the more helpful that's gonna be. So I always say let's keep it short, sweet, and predictable. With kids, if you can keep it under 30 minutes, that's gonna be the best. So I know some folks will do things like first we take a bath, then they do some playtime, and then we read 3 books, and then we do a sleep story, and then we have our check-in, right? Let's narrow that down,
There.
right? Because we want to help prepare our brain and our body for sleep. So keeping it short, sweet, and predictable. Always trying to encourage folks to turn off or reduce screens before about an hour before bed.
Oh no,
Um,
wait. I can't watch Blanche and Michael and Dwight before
I'm never going to tell you what to do, but well, I think there's a couple of factors that researchers talk about with screens. Another term that I'm sure a lot of folks have heard is blue light, right? So that blue light does make a difference. Um, and I do think that's important, but equally as important, I think, is what are you consuming? Is it activating or is it calming? Is it the same episode of The Office that you've watched 100 times that you could like rehearse in your sleep? Or are you watching like Game of Thrones, right? Um, so thinking about the blue light factor, the what are you consuming factor, and then what is it taking the place of? So rather than reading, watching something on a screen is probably going to be more activating, or doing a meditation or talking with your partner, those types of things. So thinking about screens, thinking about what is your routine looking like, keeping it short, keeping it calming, and I don't know if this comes up for you, Tremaine, but a lot of times what I'm hearing from parents is that's when my kid really wants to unload about the day, and get some things off their chest, which is amazing that your kid wants to do that, and that really speaks to your relationship um and the kid trusts you and all of those great things. And I try and encourage folks to let's move that to earlier in the night, or a different time of the day so that they can kind of get their brain and body ready for that sleep as part of the routine.
No, that is a really good point. And I think that irregardless of what age, whether we're talking about children or adults, I think that part of winding down or creating a relaxing bedtime routine is to avoid stimulating activities and stressful conversations as much as you can, right? And so things that can be stressful or stimulating to a child, you just kind of want to start thinking about those things, or maybe prompt, that child to maybe dive into some of that information at dinner time, what you want to do it well before bed. In addition to, I think with adults, like I set pretty strict boundaries, and my family knows this. When it comes to bedtime, but one thing I will say is that anything that is distressing, I generally just turn it off. I just
Hmm.
really say, nope, can't do it. Not, I'm not reading that
Yeah.
text, right? I just really try to set some boundaries, and some limits with my family and friends, just so that I can relax my mind and prepare for sleep. So I would say
Yeah.
creating a relaxing bedtime routine is definitely key. Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say about that is one of the goals that I encourage folks to think about is trying to help kids, and this is true for adults too, but trying to help kids to fall asleep under conditions that they can do independently in the middle of the night by themselves. So if, the kid is falling asleep, with you lying next to them or a light on, then when they wake up in the middle of the night, that's how they're going to most easily fall asleep again. So helping folks to shift some of that as well, to like help build up that independent sleep skill if that is important to you.
For sure. What do you think about like the sleep environment, right? Like I think that, there's something to be said about, your bedroom and, how you set it up and the
Mm.
colors and, So what do you think about like the sleep environment? Do you think that plays a role too?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure a lot of these strategies that we're talking about, folks have heard before. And I encourage people to think and reflect on like how it's playing out. So, the optimal sleep environment is dark, quiet, cool, and comfortable. So, thinking back into your own room, thinking into the kids' room, about what that's looking like and if there's any room for improvement, or ways to adjust.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about blue light and how that can just really go against the dark room, right? I think for a long
Hmm.
time, I didn't even have a television in my room for a long time, but I was in grad school and I was like, I need my sleep. Because I need to learn and memorize what I'm being taught. And so it wasn't until, after grad school, post grad, and all of that, I decided to finally get one. But I'm very like sometimes I'm like, I'm not turning this on today. I won't turn it
Hmm.
on because I think it does play a role or can be disruptive to the overall sleep environment when I know that dark room creates a sense of calmness for me. Um,
Hmm.
and when it's quiet and it's dark and it's cool, I think it just prepares my body to really, I think, prepare itself to go to sleep. So, uh,
Hmm.
for sure. And I know there's some people who use earplugs, so that can also help. Some people like to have a fan, right? Just to ensure
Hmm.
that the room remains cold throughout the night because sometimes you get warm in the middle of the night, that can be disruptive to your sleep. So
Hmm.
some of those are some practical things that can also assist with making your bedroom a good sleep environment.
Yeah. What do you think about, and of course you could dive into a lot in this area, but I know we talked a lot about stress and anxiety and kind of that chicken and egg situation. Stress can lead to disrupted sleep. Disrupted sleep can lead to stress. So what are some things that you think about or talk with folks about with managing some of that stress and anxiety?
Yeah, I really encourage journaling. And if my clients are listening to this, I'm like, oh, there she go with that journaling thing again. So I really encourage journaling, short meditation. And so I have clients who utilize prayer as a means of meditation, but really try to encourage like what self-care strategies are we exercising to help assist us with stress and anxiety. And I think, we're not just talking about like stress and anxiety in this clinical sense, but we all experience, right, stress, and we all have some levels of anxiety, or that the day brings about some level of anxiety at some point, right? We're all going to experience it. And so it's inevitable. And so I think it's important to think about, how do I get some of that up off me so I can go to bed, right?
hmm
The way I
hmm
explain to my clients is like, how can I release some of that stress and anxiety so that I'm able to get some rest for the night, right? Because I know there might be some additional stressors that I'll have to face the next day. So I try to help clients identify practical strategies within their home environment that allows for them to release some of that stress and anxiety. I do try to discourage things like alcohol intake, right? I think sometimes, we engage in, or people can engage in substance use, such as like a glass of wine at night, or a cocktail or something of that nature. But I think formulating healthy habits is super important, but the alcohol consumption can also be actually disruptive. I think that alcohol is a depressant, so it definitely slows down your central nervous system, and so it makes you feel relaxed and that you be prepared to go to sleep. But it also has some adverse effects that can be really disruptive to the sleep. So I really try to encourage clients to, be mindful that, when we're dealing with stress and anxiety, let's not go to the glass of wine or the cocktail at the end of the night.
Yeah. Well, and I talk with parents about practicing as part of the night routine, like we were talking about earlier. Like, maybe one of the last things you do with your child is practicing a calming tool,
Mm.
really explicitly to strengthen that muscle, and to help generalize that. So making it a go-to strategy for them, as well as some of the physiological benefits. So whether that's box breathing or, there's lots of fun ones that you can do with kids, like cocoa breathing or things like that. But just making that part of the routine, because then it's a lot more likely to actually happen. Um, what kind of conversations, I know I touched on this earlier, what kind of conversations do you have with folks about independent sleep and kids sleeping in their own beds? I'm seeing a laugh there. What are you thinking about with that?
So I have to always separate, right, like my personal opinion about it, because I'm like, you're sleeping in your own bed. But I think that, I try to be mindful of like cultural considerations, right? It depends on, whom I'm talking to, because I always see clients within context. And so what applies to one doesn't apply to
hmm
all. And so as a psychologist, as a clinician working with people, I try to exercise some flexibility in my thinking to consider those cultural pieces. Because
Right, because some some cultures where it's a lot more common, right?
Absolutely.
Um, or
Absolutely.
even within family culture, more specifically. So yeah, I usually
And I
start
think
there
not only
too.
just like the commonality, but like sometimes it's just not maybe financially feasible or just logistics, right? Depending on, different cultural groups where, there's a heavy emphasis on the collective, right? And sometimes there's a lot of communal living, right? So the space is limited. So I think some of those pieces are so key and important to take into consideration, especially when you are helping your clients to identify strategies to optimize their sleep hygiene.
Yeah. So that's where I start too. Is this an important thing that you want to work on? If it's not feeling important to you, then we can think about how to optimize sleep in other ways. But just helping people think about the different factors involved and the pros and cons.
Yeah. And I think lastly, I think what I would like for us to just kind of emphasize is that like sleep is something that we all have to do, but we all don't know how to do it, right? Because if we did, right, we wouldn't have people coming to us because we see it all the time, right? That their sleep is just not good. So I think there's nothing wrong with just always just asking for help, seeking help. I think sometimes mental health gets a bad rep of like, oh, I have something has to be going on in order for me
Mm,
out help. And that doesn't always necessarily have to be the case. And when I say something going on, like something, significant, right? I have to encounter such a trauma, or I have to be experiencing these severe symptoms in order for something to be going on. And so it can be something simple as, hey, I'm not getting good sleep and I would love to improve my sleep quality. Can you help me with
mhm.
that? I think that working with children, right? I think because we have this expertise and this competency in understanding child development, we understand behavioral strategies to help support children in lots of different areas. I think we can respond and provide families with support if their questions are about sleep, right? We want to create a sleep routine for our child, but what we're creating isn't working. Can you help us with that? Absolutely. Like we have experts at the Family Institute that are here to help you establish better sleep routines. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not alone. Sleep is complicated, right? Biology is real, powerful thing. And yeah, I hope that's one of the big takeaways is there's lots of things that you can do to understand your sleep better, make some tweaks to help yourself and your family sleep better.
And then, last but surely not least, I think, I really want to emphasize this idea that, or this service that is available for parents called parent coaching. So the Family Institute provides an opportunity for us to service and focus our clinical work on working with parents through parent coaching. Parent coaching is a therapeutic service for parents and caregivers who may be experiencing challenges in navigating the role as parents. And so, again, it can be help me with my sleep, or I'm trying to establish a sleep routine and I'm having some challenges for my child, or I'm just really having a hard time with parenthood. Can you help me out? I think that that is one of the cool newer services that we provide, that's out there for parents. And so we're really hoping that through parent coaching, we're able to support parents in a much more direct way.
Yeah,
I think that wraps it up. Yeah, this is good.
yeah. Thanks for talking with me about sleep.
Yeah, I actually learned a lot. And I think the caffeine crash, that probably was that probably was the takeaway for me, the caffeine. Um, so I appreciate that. So thank you, Leigh, for partnering with me to get this information out. I think there's important information. And again, for anyone who is interested in getting some support, even around sleep or something else, do not hesitate to reach out to us at the Family Institute.
Yeah, thanks to everyone for joining in.